I suppose it's time I stop procrastinating and get to making this video. Recently, on stream and off stream, I've been playing all the furry games I could find, and there is way more than I thought, and I've got thoughts on all of them, so now that's your problem. So let's get started with the first furry game I'm reviewing today. Fuga, Melodies of Steel. Okay, so who here has heard of CyberConnect 2? No one? They made the Dot Hack games. Really? Don't know what those are either? They made Ninja Storm and Kakarot. Well, have you ever asked yourself what project all those anime games are funding? It's called the Little Tales Bronx series. Weird name, I know, but don't ask questions. It's about a world full of cat people, the Feli Neko, and dog people, the Kaininu, and worst of all, they're all French somehow. Oddly, this series appears to be told out of order, with each game in the series falling into its own place. It started with Tail Concerto for the PS1, and then there was Solar to Robo on the DS, but the games we're talking about now is Fuga 1 and Fuga 2, which is set before either of those two entries. You play as Molt, one of the few children from the sleepy, remote village of Petite Mona. But everything changed when the Fire Nation, the Nazis, the Burmans, so yeah, the dog Nazis, attacked. However, in a forbidden cave, the children come upon an ancient weapon, the behemoth tank known as the Taranis. With the ancient weapon of mass destruction in their hands, the children set out to bring peace back to their country. It's a turn-based JRPG, and your party starts with a few characters. There's the aforementioned Malt Marzipan, the protagonist and leader of the group because he's the oldest. Then there's May, Malt's much younger sister, Hana, the second oldest who's the mother of the group, Kyle, the city boy turned country, Boron, the big eater with the bigger gun, and Socks, the turbo nerd who aspires for more. But you do come across more characters to fill out your party as you go throughout the game, from a set of twins to a child who defects from the enemy's side. Both games play very similarly for better and worse, so everything I say here pretty much applies to both games. The game is fairly linear, your tank progresses on these set tracks rather than driving in an open world. While it is restrictive, it also means grinding isn't a thing because the bosses at the end of each track are matched pretty well to your party's level. You're also given the option of multiple paths, with the more difficult ones offering more rewards. The second game spices this up by having airship services, acting as a shop or letting you double back to get more stuff. The real joy of this game, and what you'll be doing most of, is the combat, and it really sets itself apart from just about every other JRPG. You see this tank. What sets Fuga apart from just about every other JRPG and plenty of other games is that everything in Fuga is built around it. No matter how many characters you only have one HP and MP bar that your entire party shares. This means frugality is a must, and you gotta be careful with how your party is set up because you need to be the most economical. Aside from frugality, there are other things you have to consider in your team composition. At any given time, your party is technically made up of 6 characters, 3 in the front slots, each paired with a support in the back slots with the rest in reserves. The characters in support give small boosts to the characters in front, meaning you'll often find yourself switching out who's in the rear without changing who's in the lead. But who's in front also matters too. Every weapon in Fuga comes in 3 types: large cannons, small cannons, and guns. Red, yellow, and blue for ease of use. These 3 weapons are matched to the shields of your enemies, match the colors, and you can delay your enemy's turn, kind of like the Trail series. But that's not all either. Sometimes enemies have armor, severely reducing your damage. So sometimes you're forced to ignore the shields and break down that armor so you can score the big numbers. The game thrives on these moment-to-moment changes when you're forced to make these split-second decisions. Battles can even have multiple stages where one setup that was good at the beginning swiftly needs to be changed for the next. Do you want to try status effects, or do you want to break their armor? Maybe you'll just try ignoring it and going for raw damage. And the passives from those in the support role allow you to make these specific changes to tailor your formation to whatever you're dealing with. Do you want a boost in speed, or maybe you want to increase the odd of a status effect hitting? But you know what? That's still not all. Because as each character fights, they might enter a hero mode, which gives them an extra buff that can seriously turn the tide of battle. Like acting immediately after taking damage, or a massive speed boost, or just delaying enemies in one attack. It's like Fuga's combat was designed by Billy Mays because there's still more to cover. Fill up a heart gauge and the ally in the front and back will be able to team up to do a super attack. And each character has a set special effect for a link attack, like recovering MP when used, so these are yet another thing you can tailor to your needs. Combat is 80% of what you'll be doing in this game, and it leans so far into it, making sure it's some of the best of any game you've ever played. About 10% of that time not spent on combat is spent during intermissions. They're like rest points or save areas, letting you stop fighting for a second to interact with the game's other systems. You can upgrade your tank, plant crops, cook food, and of course, hang out with your friends. They're called link events, and they're kind of like social links from Persona, letting you get some time between characters to learn more about them. And Persona's social links are a good comparison because these link events aren't just for fun, they impact combat too. You need to reach at least link 1 between two characters to get those link attacks I mentioned before. And then there's also your character conditions, which improve by doing things they want. Doing so will make them feel great, meaning they can enter that hero mode I mentioned before to help during combat. In Fuga 2, there's a judgment system where you can decide Malt's morals depending on what you choose. And depending on if you're empathetic or resolute, Malt unlocks leader skills, which are random benefits that occur during battle. So much of this game is dedicated to combat, and so many of its systems are dedicated to making sure it's the best it can be. And it's wild that the story is actually as good as the gameplay. The story is surprisingly heartfelt, dealing with the horrors of war and losing those close to you. Your heart aches as you watch these children, and yes, children, because the oldest among them is only 12, see the horrors of war. And the horrors of war are elaborated on in the sequel, and you wonder how close these children will come to committing these horrors. The main way this is brought into the story is the use of the dreaded soul cannon. If you're ever caught in a desperate situation during a boss battle in the first game, you're given a choice. Load the soul cannon. However, like the name implies, there's only one thing you can use as fuel. The soul of one of the children, sacrificing them for good. But the ante gets upped in Fuga 2, where you don't have control over it. If your HP ever gets too low, the soul cannon will automatically get loaded, and now there's a timer. Crush your enemies within the time limit or face a permanent loss. And losing a character is a big deal. Yes, you win the fight, but your characters are your skills. You lose everything they can do. It's a wonderful system that I prefer over the first game where the soul cannon was so easy to avoid. It's a good way to tie the gameplay into the themes of the game's story. As you sit there asking yourself, who would make a super weapon powered by the souls of literal children? You won't notice it at first, but there's more to this furry world than meets the eye. Like, have you noticed how those comics you collect seem to mirror your journey? And those reports you get after each chapter, what details do they hide? And if you care to do the journey again on New Game Plus, even more secret documents await your discovery. As you play Fuga 1 and Fuga 2, you'll slowly piece together a past long forgotten by anyone still alive, and even meet a few revenants who should have stayed in the past where they belong. I won't get into the plot too much because this is genuinely one of the most fascinating games I've ever played. As you can probably tell, I could go on and on about how good Fuga 1 and Fuga 2 are. But I have other games to talk about, so I'm just going to give these games a 10 out of 10, go play them right now, and move on. I find myself playing furry visual novels quite a lot, and one of the most popular ones there is Nekojishi. Nekojishi is a game made by Studio Klondike, and the one that put them on the map. The name Nekojishi means kitty lion, though there aren't actually any lions in Nekojishi, so I suppose it'd be better to say kitty tiger. Like the name implies, it's about a college student who finds themselves suddenly rooming with quite a few big cats. It's a story told in first person, with some room for you to insert yourself into the protagonist, but they are a defined character with their own wants, dreams, and history. It's not as much personality as, say, Chase from Echo or Dave from Password, but they do have a name. Tian Liao Lin. He comes from a Jitong family, a kind of Chinese folk priest, but that really isn't Liao's interest. He just wants to dance like it's footloose. But instead of Kevin Bacon, it's your family's guardian tiger. His name is, well, that's kind of a spoiler, so we'll just call him Guardian Tiger. But he's quickly joined by two others. The first is Likulao, the clouded leopard and a god from the Rukai people. The last one is a bit different. Rather than being a spirit, he's possessing her senpai, so we just call him Shu-Chi. But the thing is, they all want something different from Liao, from you. The Guardian Tiger wants you to stay with your family and take up the mantle of Jitong. Likulao needs your help communicating with his people, a trip that's sure to keep you away from home for some time. And lastly, Shu-Chi needs you to be the priest of his failing temple to save his god, something you definitely can't do from home. And that's the entire premise of the game, to make up your mind and decide what Liao will do with his life. You got 3 furries, 3 choices, 3 routes, kinda. The game has multiple endings which change depending on how you answer things, but it does have a singular true ending. There's also quite a few bad endings which range from sad, very sad, and death, so make sure you choose wisely. The story takes place over a month or two as Liao lives with all these cats, gets to know them, and deals with the problem such an odd living arrangement creates. Rumors spread about your relationship, the ethics of using invisible spirits to your advantage. Do you follow or do you disobey your family's wishes? There are a few other furries and scalies in the game, but you only have those 3 main romanceable options. Sadly, I find them all rather basic. If you're familiar with furry visual novels, romance in general, these 3 choices fall into very well-tread archetypes. Guardian Tiger is the husbando himbo. He's smart and reliable, reminding you to clean your room, but aloof to some things. He does have an interest in modern technology, which does give him some personality, but it's not too big and it's often put on the proverbial back burner. Most of Guardian Tiger's dialogue is focused solely on that stoic husband role, where he's reminding you to do your chores or reminding the other 2 choices to stay in line. He's not a bad character, but I wish he was doing something else aside from being the responsible one all the time. Likulao is a clouded leopard guardian tiger, and his most notable trait is being from the Rukai people. The Rukai are one of Taiwan's indigenous peoples, and honestly, it's really cool learning about them through Likulao. Actually, speaking of this, Nekojishi has an in-game glossary for a lot of terms, and it was surprisingly fun to learn new things as the entries appeared. Being from the Rukai has a heavy part in coloring his character. He's quiet and reserved, not entirely by choice, but due to being bad at speaking Mandarin. It adds to his character that's just unfamiliar with the everyday life of a college student. He always means well, but intentions rarely translate to actions. And there's this desperation to help his people, which always leads to him making poor choices, especially when Liao is involved, earning Guardian Tiger's ire. He's cool and mysterious, but the problem is that he's too cool and mysterious. He barely speaks, remaining hard to read throughout the entire game. That may be attractive to a point, but it does get in the way of knowing him as a character and makes him rather one-note. The last of our options is Shu-Chi, your senpai, but not really. Like I said, a leopard cat guardian tiger is possessing the actual Shu-Chi for the time being. This gives him the unique position of not being a spirit, so he's visible to everyone else and has a life of his own. He's got friends, school, and things like the dance club, meaning he isn't always at Liao's side. That being said, he does feel like the most prevalent one of the group, driving the plot forward and often initiating conflict. He's the group's troublemaker, bubbly and fun, but also mischievous. He knows he's gonna get criticized by Guardian Tiger for what he does, but does it anyway. Not only does making trouble on purpose differentiate him from Likulao, but the past of Shu-Chi, the human person, is relevant for a portion of the game. I personally think it makes him the most interesting of the 3 choices, but the game does default for a formula for most of the story. It's almost always Likulao or Shu-Chi making trouble and Guardian Tiger has to scold them for it. It leads to Liao, the actual protagonist, feeling oddly uninvolved in the game, like he's a bystander watching the actual main characters do stuff. Which is weird because you are given a lot of choices. You deciding who to hang out with decides which endings you get, yet Liao always feels more like a mechanism to get every other character involved in the story. This does make sense because Liao's personality is actually pretty light. You're clearly supposed to insert yourself into him. The main allure of this game is clearly the big cats, so the story prioritizes them over the actual protagonist. That probably won't be a turnoff for a lot of you since most of you aren't playing for Liao, you're just playing to see these big cats interact. It leaves the entire narrative just feeling a bit weird. And it's not helped by the music. While it isn't bad, it is very bland. I can't hum a single song outside of the one from the title screen, and even that's only the first few notes. I will praise the visuals though. All of the backgrounds look great, and there's some crazy variety from Liao's room to the mountains to parks and even hot springs. Mixed in with all these backgrounds are quite a few CGs to spice things up. They're used well to add to the moment and make certain scenes more memorable than they otherwise would be. It took me about 15 hours to get through Nekojishi, but I was livestreaming it and I don't play games all that fast. You'll probably be able to finish it in about 12 hours. Now here's a game I actually found out about thanks to a banner ad on Fur Affinity. Why was I on Fur Affinity, you ask? Well, I think you should stop asking questions. My questionable browsing habits aside, Brok the Investigator is an indie game made by Cowcat Games. It's a point and click with a punch, or well, actually now that I think about it, punch works well here too. That's because, while Brok the Investigator may be a point and click, you know, like Putt Putt and Spy Fox, I gotta cover that game eventually, where you take your mouse and point and click at stuff to make the character do things. It's a system that works well for mystery/detective games since it gives the player freedom to walk around, collect clues, and explore the level. You talk to people, add items to your inventory, and slowly piece together the tools you collect and the mystery you're facing. And Brok the Investigator uses its genre to its advantage, letting the bits of the environment you can interact with explain the setting. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic animal society, where you got the dome where all the nice and cool drummers live, and the slums where, well, the poor people live. You play as Brok, the titular investigator trying to make ends meet for his adopted son, Graf. He's quite the simple guy, kind-hearted to a fault but not afraid to throw down, doing his best despite their traumatic past and frequent nightmares. A lot of Brok's story has to deal with him trying to make things right in an unjust world, as is the plight of noir detectives. You have to ask yourself if it's right to ruin lives, or whether or not truth or comfort is the right answer. But over the course of simply trying to live your life, both Brok and Graf get caught up in a conspiracy that will decide the fate of everyone. I honestly prefer point and click to the whole Telltale style of games because the environments here are always so big. It's great fun to just walk around and click on objects, seeing what which character you're playing as will say. And I do mean which character because you don't just play as Brok, you also play as his son Graf. Unlike Brok, Graf's story follows his attempt to get out of the slums and be a drummer by doing an elaborate school test. There's the written portion, which I wouldn't have been able to do without my chat helping me, and then there's the science presentation part of the test, which is a whole thing you have to do. And that's just the beginning of the sheer nonsense Graf has to go through to try and pass his test. It's the elaborate maneuvers Brok and Graf have to go through to either solve their case or pass their test which make up the puzzles. And there's quite a lot of depth and variety to them as well, with some even managing to involve platforming of all things. One thing I really like are these little ads scattered around the map. You can spin them to solve a puzzle if you're ever stuck, and there's even a bonus for finding them all. While they are called hints, they do pretty much just give you the answer, which is quite useful if you took a big sip of the dumb fuck juice like me. But what makes Brok the Investigator unique, aside from the art style, is its gameplay. Like I said, this is a point and click with a punch, and I did mean it. With a single tap of the button, you go from point and click to beat 'em up. That's right, with a single click of a button, you basically change what genre of game you're playing. It blends these two styles of gameplay together very well to the point where it feels like one isn't overpowering the other. You're not playing a point and click hampered by a beat 'em up or a beat 'em up slowed down by a point and click. A lot of the times you'll have to use both systems to overcome what the game throws at you. And I don't mean solving a puzzle to avoid a fight or doing a fight instead of a puzzle. Things in the environment have their own HP bars, so if you're really at a loss, try breaking something. What's more is that Brok and Graf actually play differently, which only helps the beat 'em up part of the game feel like an actual part of the game rather than a tacked on detail. I haven't tried it myself, but very recently the game did get a co-op option. It even lets you play as some of the characters you don't get to in the story mode, which is pretty neat. The game's also very open, letting the player make a lot of choices whether they know it or not. You could solve that puzzle, or you can just try smashing your way through it. And it goes so far beyond just the puzzles because it usually means the game will not only let you make stupid decisions, but plan on them. When I started punching a character for the lulz, I didn't expect the game to let me kill him, and I didn't expect it to keep going instead of giving me a game over. And this wasn't a minor character, this was an important named dude it just let me murder. One thing that stood out to me as I streamed the game, and a point I'd often make, is that the entire game has this Saturday morning cartoon feel. From the art to the way characters talk, it gives the entire thing a charming atmosphere I can't help but love. It reminds me of watching SWAT Cats on Boomerang. Oh, SWAT Cats, that's another thing I have to cover on this channel. And it's not just the art style. Like a 90s cartoon, all the characters you meet are quite zany and goofy. One of my favorites is Shay, Brok's weird inventor friend. She's just your average, everyday scatterbrain scientist. Or is she? There's tons of hidden details and things that will easily go over your head until you take a better look. I think the art style and characters contrast nicely from the actual plot of the game, which gets very dark towards the end. It's like watching SpongeBob solve an actual murder, like actual murder. What's more is that Brok the Investigator has tons of replay value thanks to the myriad of endings you can get. Will you get one of the good ones or one of the sad ones? Will Graf pass his test? Will Brok end up committing suicide? Or maybe something else will happen entirely? And I'm not lying about that last one. Suicide is an actual ending you can get, so choose wisely. There are so many endings that this is the game's way of keeping track of them. Considering the sheer amount of content in this game, the fact that it's only $20 without a sale is a steal. My first playthrough took a little under 15 hours. That's pretty good for a cheap indie game. Brok the Investigator gets an easy 9 out of 10. I highly recommend you play this game. One thing I habitually like to do is browse itch.io? Itch.io? I don't know, for new games. They have an entire furry tag, so if you're looking for furry games to play, it's one of the best places to start. A lot of them are free, and the fact that they're indie games gives them a lot of heart and soul you usually don't find elsewhere. One such game that I found stood out from the rest, and it's called Dog Bloods. It's another visual novel, surprise surprise, but this one is different from the rest. This game was actually made in China. So far, it has 3 chapters, but only the first has been translated into English. What's more interesting than that is that this visual novel wasn't made in Ren'Py, it was developed in Unity. And the difference in engine shows, as the game looks vastly different from most others. Having its own unique presentation I quite like, but let me explain the game. Oh, and fair warning, this visual novel is 18 plus, like full frontal 18, so don't play this one if you have a problem with that. That's actually why what you see on screen won't match up with what I'm saying, because there is a lot of wang in this, like to the point that there's a character who wears nothing but a see-through raincoat. I literally can't put him on screen. The protagonist is a 25-year-old dog by the name of Fuga. We know that when he was young, he was orphaned in a tragic accident and since then has been cursed with bad luck. His guardian is the 30-year-old Arctic fox, Tianbei. And I really do like Fuga's personality because it's very negative, so to speak. It's clear that he's traumatized and hasn't received any proper treatment for it. He's unsure of himself, lacking confidence in his own abilities, and he falls to Tianbei's advice for everything. And given the kinds of things Xianbei has him do, which I can't show on screen if that tells you anything, that might be by the fox's design. Seeing the two of them interact does a lot to keep the game interesting in its slower moments. It's evident right away as the game opens with Togo driving Xianbei around, and neither he and by extension us know where we're going. And yet, despite the slow start, barring a few flub-ups to which I'm going to blame on an imperfect translation, the prose of the visual novel is quite good. I find a lot of people overlook prose, but it does a lot to make reading a visual novel enjoyable. This might be too highbrow of a reference, but it reminds me a lot of the book The Maid by Nita Prose. Both the book and this visual novel have protagonists with distinct inner voices. It adds to the distinct visual style, helping to make Dog Bloods feel unique and special. The narrator, that being Tugo, has a thought process that's unique. While it isn't super relatable, it does make seeing his threads of logic quite entertaining. Especially when the plot starts advancing and he's thrown into an unusual situation. The place he was driving Xianbei to is a building under construction, but all of a sudden, they have a naked hunk fall into the roof of their car. And that's actually another thing I really like about this visual novel. Slow starts are a bit in vogue, not even just for visual novels, but actual books too. We get a period of normalcy, which is useful for giving us an idea of the characters and contrasting from when things go to shit. Off the top of my head, the visual novel Echo does this to great effect, but it is nice to have one that just throws you right into the weirdness of the plot, even if it's a little hard to follow at first. The supernatural conflicts appear quickly, and it gives us something to think about in short order. The final character we're introduced to is the Prince, although that's probably not his actual name. He's a prostitute that was collaborating with the naked hunk for unknown reasons. I actually like this interaction between him and Togu as the protagonist has to figure out what the prince is doing. It's the first moment where Xianbei isn't figuratively or literally whispering in the protagonist's ear, letting us get a good look at Tugo's personality uninfluenced. We see the lack of confidence and awkwardness come out in full display, but also that he's surprisingly resourceful and pretty smart, able to deduce the hunk and the prince's true intentions quite quickly. Despite there being only one chapter of Dog Bloods, I ended up really liking it. The setting is unique, and the writing, while flawed due to translation, manages to really stand out. The characters are probably the best feature, with them all being fairly interesting in their own unique ways. I know this segment has been short, but I can only talk so much about so little. I'll give Dog Bloods a 7 out of 10. It would be 9 out of 10 if there was more content, so I eagerly await new translations. I talk a lot about visual novels, so I figured I'd change it up for the last one. I'm not actually sure how I heard about this one. I just remember thinking, wait, they made a Redwall video game? But what I got was something much different and, dare I say, even better. Small Saga is a Kickstarter indie game that actually managed to see full release. And it released fairly recently too, dropping just last month. Well, last month when I'm writing this video should be up by like New Year's-ish? I don't know. Small Saga is such a special game to me because it manages to be very unique and yet nothing unique at all. From its story, to its art, to even its style, I've seen it done elsewhere. But it does it all so well, it elevates the entire project into a truly magical experience. It's like Demon Slayer, it doesn't do anything new or special, but it does it all so well that you don't care. Like, just listen to the initial concept. You play as a mouse named Verm, who's helping his brother Lance steal from a grocery store. But things go awry when they run into an exterminator, and Verm is forced to cut off his own tail to survive, something his brother couldn't do. Arming himself with a pocket knife and determination, Verm swears to get his revenge. Do you hear this? This is literally just Berserk, but with mice and squirrels and stuff. He even has the fuck off huge sword. Even its visual style, the way battles start and end, has been done a dozen times before in things like Final Fantasy and the Tales series. But it manages to bring all of that to new heights with variety and depth of location, like a character making a comment when you stomp on the roof of their little race car. My favorite facet of taking what others have done to new heights is in the world building. They don't call the grocery store a grocery store, they call it heaven. and the exterminator is simply known as the Yellow God. But that's not all either, because the world of Small Saga is heavily fantastical, but at the same time, it isn't. That pocket knife Verm is carrying is called a god tool, the Titan Ripper. And one of your party members can do fire magic, but not really, they're just using a lighter. It's not unlike warrior cats, wow, showing a bit of my ass with this one, where it makes the mundane mythical. However, unlike warrior cats where the animals live apart from humans, the setting here is intrinsically entwined with them. It plays with the idea of its cast being rodents and small creatures so well to make these mundane things seem larger than they are. Fireworks are anti-aircraft magic missiles, and a godly spear is simply a carving fork. It makes you want to explore the world to see what other mundane things can be made into myths. The one that stood out to me the most is Sky Garden, the Kingdom of Squirrels. It used to be ruled by Clan Red long ago, but the Grey Squirrels ousted them and they haven't been seen in ages. This is a reference to a real thing, not a coup, but to the fact that the native British red squirrels are endangered and being outcompeted by the North American Grey Squirrel. It's a wonderful and subtle way to remind us that the land ruled by a duke with knights and magic is simply our own. Like I said, Verm's story is one of revenge, but you get 3 other party members. The first is Siobhan, the noble mole with an interest in god tools which goes against the old ways. Then there's Bruce, the last red squirrel in all of Rodentia. And finally Gwen, the mouse who fled their home, the Hall of the White Gods, after they chopped off her legs. And it's seeing this party interact that is part of the real charm of the game. There's fun and whimsy in seeing Siobhan refuse to help Verm as he fights a bunch of turtles. Or seeing Gwen and Bruce look at some Rule 34. I'm not lying, that's an actual thing that happens. But there's also this genuine sincerity, seeing them help and pull each other up, asking themselves who they are in this world that's so big and yet so small. You may have noticed that I'm talking quite a bit about the writing and not the gameplay. That's because I'm a little divided on it. This is going to sound insane, but the design philosophy is a lot like Kingdom Hearts meets Cuphead. Yeah, that sounds insane, but listen for a sec. The game is boss-focused, with basic enemy encounters being almost entirely optional. And EXP doesn't exist either, rather you get skill points for a skill tree upon beating certain bosses. This does mean that grinding isn't a thing and you'll be ready for just about every encounter. But it also makes you realize why normal battles are a part of just about every other RPG. Without them, games can be quite short. Small Saga proves this as you can beat it in around 5 hours. And while 5 hours for a $20 game isn't bad, I did expect a little more. But the thing that saved Small Saga is that it has tons of extra side content. Sure, you can beat the game in like 4 hours if you really try, but take a second to stop and smell the roses. From a side quest involving some turtles, to a weird spider that will give you money, to even a chef that will give you special items. My favorite kind of side quests are the ones to get the party members' ultimate moves. At the last minute, before you cross the point of no return in the story, why don't you go ahead and revisit the party's homes? You'll find more great writing and a unique boss behind each. I'm not going to explain what happens because of spoilers, but I will recommend that you go back and refight Tiger. There's a pretty funny interaction behind all of that. Doing this side stuff managed to bump this game from around 5 hours to 8.5, and I know I didn't get everything. The dev also intends to add more content, which will only make the price tag more worth it. I could keep going, but it's getting very late, and I do mean very. It is literally 5 AM of the day this video is supposed to go up. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give Small Saga an 8 out of 10. With some more content, it can definitely hit that perfect 10. Now, let's wrap this video up and get to my Patreon shoutouts. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chow, Choron, Garen Lefay, Dranking Yara, Unknown RC, Lightning Shadow, and Kayun. For our 4 stars, we have Miki Moon and Miko, the Metallicats. And for our Super D-Tuper special 5-star shoutouts, we have... First, Vanilla Flower, the Giant Bacteria. Second, Poor Mage, the Dark Cat. Then, The Good Old Days, the Razor's Edge. Followed by Hodari Lion, the Mad Cat. Next, Sky King 64, the Ghost Pilot. And finally, Mahagasaur, the Past Master. Thank you for watching. Do be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Check out my live streams on Mondays and Fridays, and do check out my Ko-fi and Patreon. As always, this is your host Fuuri, signing out.